Bridget Phillipson is here with us now, Shadow Education Secretary. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Let's talk about what happened in Rochdale to start with, defacing the cenotaph.
I mean, just absolutely appalling and sickening to see that, and I hope the police make every effort to catch those responsible. I'm sure they will, and that they feel the full force of the law for their actions.
OK, what do you think it says to British people when something like that happens?
I think people find it horrifying, as I do. You know, it's an important weekend as we come up to Armistice Day and Remembrance Sunday. And we, all of us as a country, want to recognise the contribution of those who've served our country. My granddad served in the RAF in the East for a number of years. So as a family, we always want to remember the contribution that of our servicemen and women. I know that families, the length and breadth of the country, will be doing just that. So to see, you know, that disrespectful, appalling defacement of a memorial is appalling. But that isn't the majority of the British people. The majority of the British people will this weekend be remembering those who paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we can enjoy freedoms today.
What about those who want to march to free Palestine? That is very much a live subject at the moment. What's Labour's view as of this morning?
We don't want to see any disruption to those important commemorations. I note what the Met Police have said, that they believe they can see off any potential for disruption, and they're confident that won't happen. Of course, these are independent decisions that need to be made in terms of operational policing. It's right and proper that the police take those independent of politicians. And I don't think what we've seen from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has made their job easier. The inflammatory nature and the way in which she is seeking to stoke division, I don't think helps the police seeking to manage quite a sensitive area. None of us want to see disruption. We want to recognise the contribution that many people made for a very long period of time for the freedoms that we enjoy today, the freedom of expression, the freedom to protest. I'm confident that that can happen, alongside making sure that when people are at the cenotaph remembering our war dead and our servicemen and women, they can do so in a way that is respectful and is not disrupted.
Have Labour MPs been asked not to attend pro-Palestine protests?
We've been told that we need to be careful that we don't end up alongside people where there may be banners or language being used that is unacceptable. And sadly, there have been incidents on some of these marches where that has happened. I appreciate that is not the majority of people who want to demonstrate and who want us to see more humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. Absolutely, that's what I want to see too. And I want to see the hostages released. But I think politicians, all of us, we've got a duty and a responsibility to choose our language with care, but also to act in a way that sets an example to the country.
And that's the leader saying, be careful.
Well, I think we all of us have a duty to make sure that's the case.
Asked to not march with people who necessarily have banners that would not be in line with what the party thinks. Is that from the leader?
I think it's we are frequently reminded of these things from the party hierarchy, that we have a responsibility as members of Parliament in terms of our conduct and our actions. And it's right that we're held to a high standard on this. We do need to proceed with care in our choice of language and in our actions. And I think the last thing that any member of Parliament would want would be to inadvertently end up with a group of individuals where they're not conducting themselves in the way that the majority of protesters will do, which is peaceful and expressing themselves properly and within the law. 11
Burnley councillors, as you know, have stepped down, and a member of the Shadow front bench has now also decided to do the same thing. Is the party really united? I mean, it's OK not to be united on some things. Are you united on what's happening in Gaza?
I do understand colleagues' strength of feeling on this. We, all of us, every day, see on our television screens the horrifying images of the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We, all of us, saw the absolutely appalling atrocities committed by Hamas. We know that hostages are still being held, and every day when further unspeakable crimes come to light in terms of what happened in Israel on the 7th of October, it's appalling and shocking. I understand that, I recognise that. What we all want to see is a humanitarian pause to get more aid into Gaza. It's absolutely essential that happens. But in the long run, this will require a lasting political settlement, and that's why I do welcome the involvement of the US government and the international community to make sure we get to a position where we have a secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state.
Sure. I hear you when you say humanitarian crisis. I was listening to a representative of the UN calling it a humanitarian catastrophe. Would you go that far?
I think it is an emergency, a crisis, a catastrophe. I mean, there are lots of words you could use to describe the plight of children and families that we see every day on our television screens. That's why All of us within the Labour Party are pushing for more aid to get into Gaza. It's why we do recognise that the government have made an additional contribution from the government, from the British taxpayer, to make that happen. We need to go faster. Of course we do. And alongside that, I want to see the release of hostages. We know that people are still being detained and we want to see their freedom.
Yeah, I spoke to 3 mums yesterday who last saw their children on motorbikes being taken into Gaza. Can't even begin to imagine. Do you want to have a quick listen?
This was the last time I saw Ethan. His motorcycle continued to Gaza.
To be able to talk publicly about such terrible events, I cannot imagine what the families must be going through right now. And every time you see footage or you hear commentary as to the full barbarity of what took place, you do then have to recognise that Israel was always going to act to seek the release of hostages, to secure its borders. Alongside that, I know that we all want to make sure that there is humanitarian aid going into Gaza. Children are often the victims who are caught up in conflict and they shouldn't be suffering and they need that urgent aid.
The question is whether or not it's proportional. That's a conversation for another day, because I do just want to ask you about school absences. I know that's a topic that you want to talk about today. And what's happening with kids going to school? We think they're going to school, they don't turn up.
I think we've seen a breakdown in the relationship between government and schools, but also between schools and families. And if I were Education Secretary, I would want to reset that relationship and rebuild it. Every day at school matters for our children. We know that when they're not there, it has lasting consequences for educational outcomes and for their futures. But right now, on the figures that we're releasing today, we're projected to have 1 in 4 children missing school regularly, over 2 million children by 2025. That is a staggering figure. The government are not acting on this. It's absolutely essential that we see action. That's why Labour has set out our plans for better mental health support for our children in the community, in our secondary schools, but also breakfast clubs to start the school day for our primary school children as well, to support them with their behaviour, with attendance, with outcomes, and also to support families during the cost of living crisis. This is a complex area. There's a lot going on here: the pandemic, industrial action, the rat crisis. It is complex, but I believe there are actions we could and should be taking right now to make that easier. And if I were Education Secretary, that's exactly what I'd be doing.
OK. I thought you said rat crisis for a second there, Shadow Secretary of State.
Rat crisis.
I was going to say, I've just stumbled on a big story there. It's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed.